what on earth is going on with the price of eggs at the moment. Today we're going to look at the reasons why the price of a dozen eggs has gone through the roof and see if now is the right time to take the plunge and get your own flock of chickens. Today we're talking about the egg situation from the perspective of the United States. Here in New Zealand, we've already been through our insane egg price inflation phase. So I'll talk a little bit about what happened here because there are some similarities, but there are some differences as to why this is happening. But the main reason why egg prices have gone bonkers is because of bird flu. Starting in 2022, a particularly nasty strain of bird flu has been circulating in the northern hemisphere, and that has decimated chicken flocks, the commercial flocks that lay eggs and also make the meat chickens, but today we're talking about the egg flocks. And they have been decimated by this particular strain of bird flu, and it has come back around to hit the northern hemisphere again in late 2024, and that is rolling on through into 2025. Now, I know some people don't agree that bird flu is the major reason, but it is true that the number of chickens that are available in the commercial egg laying flocks, they have been culled. There are less chickens now than there were a few months ago. So it doesn't really matter what the reason that is that you decide to agree with or disagree with. The fact is there are less chickens, and that is causing a supply and demand issue. The thing about supply and demand when you're talking about living animals that chickens are is that you can't just snap your fingers and have more hens ready to lay eggs. They take 5 months to be ready to lay eggs in those commercial flocks. And there needs to be the infrastructure to cope with the numbers that we need for replacements moving through. So you can't just say, all right, let's now have a couple million more chickens every month, because the hatcheries, the breeding farms, all of these things can't just at the snap of their fingers make more chickens. So it's a bit of a slow burn to get back to population numbers. So that's why it delays over time. It can't just instantly click back in. We can't just make more eggs at will. So that's the major reason why the cost of eggs has gone up. There are fewer chickens. There are some other reasons. Inflation is a reason. Transportation costs have gone up, both from the perspective of fuel and because there is a shortage of truck drivers to transport eggs. And eggs are a pretty expensive thing to transport. They're relatively heavy. They have to be treated carefully. So that all factors into the price that you're paying at the supermarket at the moment. And there are some regulation changes in some states where they are phasing out battery cages, so that you can no longer have battery cage farms for eggs. Now that's a similar thing that happened over here in New Zealand, which we'll talk about in just a moment, because it did have a massive impact on the prices of eggs here. But we're just overviewing the reasons why it's happening in the United States right now, and just thinking to yourself, is this the right time to get chickens if you don't already have them? If you do already have a chicken flock, you're probably pretty happy right now. But inflation comes for all of us, and it's always good to keep on top of the costs of your flock. And I have done a video all about keeping costs low in a backyard flock. Here in New Zealand, a couple of years ago, we had the price of eggs spike and we had some major egg shortages. So even if you were willing to pay the price, went to the supermarket, you could not necessarily get eggs, and there were limits on how many eggs you were allowed to buy in any one trip. Now, we didn't have a bird flu situation. Bird flu has so far not become a major issue here in New Zealand, but it could happen at any moment, so we sort of are waiting to see what happens from that perspective. But what happened here was a regulation change. Just like has happened in some states in America, the rules changed. And that meant that chicken flocks were no longer being allowed to be kept in a battery-style system with the little individual cages. They could only be kept in a colony cage, or what has mostly happened is it's been transitioned to barn raising. So big barns full of chickens laying eggs. And what happened was a lot of farmers decided with that change, which they knew was coming, so they'd planned for it, but they planned to quit. They just stopped producing eggs because it's very difficult actually to be profitable, and land prices here in New Zealand are extremely expensive. So if you needed to expand your operation to account for the regulations and you now need more space to keep your birds, it might not be possible. So the rules changed. A lot of egg farmers quit the industry completely, and that population of hens had to be rebuilt. So there was, again, a length of time for that to happen, which was, it took nearly a year before the supply came back. But what didn't happen was the price of eggs didn't go back down. The price of eggs has stayed just as high as it was when there was an actual shortage. Now, I think everyone expected the price to have to go up because it is more expensive to produce eggs in a barn system or a free-range system, but I don't think people were expecting the price to just not go back down again. Now, if people were already producing in a free-range situation, it actually worked out really well for them because all the eggs got more expensive, and suddenly their eggs were sort of the same price and people were willing to pay it instead of it being a massive premium. So the price between barn eggs and free-range eggs closed up, and more people were willing to buy free-range eggs, which is great for the free-range farmers and better for the chickens because a free-range system is much higher welfare for the birds involved. There are some other factors in our context here in New Zealand that work to keep the price of eggs high, and that is inflation has been a big issue here. Especially on things we need to import because our dollar hasn't been particularly great. So things that needed to be imported, like soy meal for chicken feed, that was expensive. Fertilizer costs went up for growing grains locally, so grains got more expensive, and fuel costs are extremely high, so transportation and all of it, it just keeps getting more and more expensive. But I suspect that that is sort of the way the world is going. So I wouldn't count on the price of eggs going down anywhere else in the world either if they've gone up, because these days it seems like what goes up does not come back down. And just a quick note on the situation that we've found ourselves in with the bird flu being able to run rampant through the commercial farms. It's just not a great idea to pack a whole bunch, thousands, hundreds of thousands of birds together in one space, which just what's gonna happen? Disease is gonna happen. Anything that comes through is gonna rip through. And if it's not bird flu, we're leaving the door wide open for anything else to come in and decimate those flocks. So until we stop operating commercial farming systems like that, they remain vulnerable to viruses and bacteria and illnesses to come and cause supply and demand issues. So the question is now the right time to get your own flock of chickens? Well, if you've already decided that it is, you can just jump on and check out my playlist, Getting Started with Chickens, and find out all about it. But if you still need a bit more convincing, stick around and we'll go over whether it is a good time for you. The first thing you need to consider is, are you allowed to have chickens? If you're in an apartment, you probably are not allowed to have chickens, and I wouldn't recommend keeping chickens inside anyway. But if you are in a situation where you are allowed to have chickens, then it is quite possibly a good time to get them. You do need to consider if you have enough space and enough time to maintain your chickens happy and healthy. But you don't need a lot of time, and you actually don't need a lot of space to keep chickens. But if you have quite a small space, you're going to need to take into consideration the right breed and the right setup for them so that they can be happy. If you have lots and lots of space, then the sky's the limit. You can go out and get whatever kind of chickens take your fancy, do your research on the different breeds and pick what seems right for you. But if you have a smaller space, then you do need to be more careful. And there I would recommend getting bantam chickens. So they are small chickens, very, very small chickens in some cases. They do not lay a huge number of eggs, but most people don't actually need a huge number of eggs. You just need enough to make breakfast and do some baking and things like that. If you eat a lot of eggs, then maybe not bantams. But if you eat the normal, regular amount of eggs, then a small flock of maybe 5 bantam hens will be perfectly fine for most families. And they fit in much smaller spaces, and they can be happier in much smaller spaces. And if you're keeping your little chickens in a little space, you will have to work harder to keep them happy. You can't just put them in a run all crammed together with nothing to do and expect things will go well. So you can check out my video about having a calm, happy flock, where I talk about ways you can keep your flock happy and not picking on each other. And yeah, you really want to look into that if you're trying to work with a small space. But you absolutely can keep chickens in a small space. You, the keeper, just has to work a little bit harder to keep them happy. So if you can have chickens and you're like, yes, I can fit them in, I've got the space, I've got the time, you need to ask yourself, why do you want chickens? If the only reason you want chickens is to have eggs, then it might not be the best choice, because chickens do a lot more than just lay eggs, and they don't always lay eggs as consistently as you might hope. So you really want to have more motivations than just eggs. So if you want to be more involved in where your food is coming from, if you want better quality eggs, if you want to know what the chickens are eating, if you want to have just control over a little bit of your life, then those are great reasons to want to get your own chickens. And if you want to do it from a welfare perspective, because even if you've only got a small space, your welfare of a backyard chicken flock is going to be much, much higher than any commercial flock, because you're there keeping an eye on them, keeping them happy, and it's just a different relationship. So even if you think, oh, I'm not sure if I really can do it, so long as you've got the minimum amount of space for them and you work hard to keep them happy, then they are going to be better off than the chickens in a commercial laying situation. So don't worry too much about that. You can keep your chickens happy. But yeah, you need to have more reasons than just eggs, because it may or may not be cheaper to have your own chickens than just buying eggs from the store. So if that's your only reason, just keep buying eggs. Find someone that keeps chickens in a situation that you approve of and buy eggs from them. Maybe you have a friend who can keep chickens who's happy to sell you some eggs. Maybe you can go to a farmer's market. Maybe you can research different brands and find one that is actually good, buy those. But it is generally cheaper to buy eggs, even if they seem quite expensive, than keeping your own chickens, because chickens do have more costs associated with them than just feeding them. You can probably beat the price of the supermarket if you just account for the chicken feed, because you can make the feed cost lower by doing sort of creative feeding strategies, depending on what breed you've got. If you've gone with a high production laying breed, then you do need to buy them good quality food. But if you've got bantams or a heritage dual purpose, you can wriggle around the edges of feed a little bit more there, because they lay less eggs overall. But that's just one cost. You also have to factor in healthcare costs like dewormers and keeping a chicken first aid kit. They're not big costs. We're not talking about keeping a horse or a cow or something here. Chickens are pretty reasonable, but there is more than just their food. And then you've got your start-up costs. So the cost of the coop and the run and bedding and all of that stuff you need to get started. So when you add all of that together, you might come out break even. You probably are spending more than eggs from the supermarket. You might not be spending more than the premium quality eggs though, and your eggs are still going to be better than the best egg that you can possibly buy. When you do it yourself, the eggs are phenomenal. I can't convey to you the difference. It's just completely different. The best supermarket egg is like down here and your eggs are up here. It's just night and day. There's no comparison. And that, I think, is a good enough reason to have your own chickens, even if you're not saving money, even if it's costing you more money. You just can't buy that egg, even if you wanted to. This video has been about the egg crisis in North America and a bit of a story about the same sort of situation as happened here in New Zealand. If you do want to get your own chickens, now's a great time, and you can jump onto the Getting Started with Chickens playlist and learn all about everything you need to know to get started on the right foot. I personally don't think that the price of eggs is going to go down much. It might go down a little bit, but the general trend is going to be to continue to go up because all of the factors that are causing the prices to go up, I don't really see going away anytime soon. So get yourself some chickens.